Great. Hello, everybody. We are here today and have a super interesting 45 minutes ahead of us. This has been a seminar that has received a lot of attention. We have, I think, close to 350 people who have signed up for the live stream or to get the recording. So we are thrilled about that. And as all of you hopefully know, the Nordic Business Ethics Initiative is all about enabling conversations, about learning from each other, and also challenging our views and challenging how we work with stewarding more responsible organizations. And today we find ourselves in a bit of a storm. And we have decided to label this seminar and the theme for our discussion today, whether we have a profession in crisis. And we are today going to discuss with amazing Alison Taylor. Alison, welcome.
Hi, it's so wonderful to see you.
It's wonderful to have you here. We could not think of a better person to invite to this conversation, where we're going to discuss the geopolitical and business climate, how it really has shifted how corporations view their responsibility. And I know you wrote an article for Harvard Business Review not too long ago about the Chief Sustainability Officer. Many Chief Sustainability Officers were elevated to the executive teams. And now we see some of that being rebranded, or the roles are being repurposed. At the same time, we also had ethics and compliance officers really advocating for cultural work and talking about business ethics and the wider responsibility of corporations. And now many in the ethics and compliance field are narrowed down to focus on, okay, but what is legally required from us? And in the context where previously accepted beliefs about corporate responsibility and values are questioned, we actually see that the letter of the law becomes some form of a safe harbor, going beyond legal requirements and talking about corporate responsibility from a wider stakeholder perspective may not be so well received around the executive table and in boardrooms. But all of us here, we do know that corporate scandals, they do not necessarily stem from illegal decisions, but from companies and organizations not thinking about the wider consequences and perceptions of how business is done. And in our recent Nordic Business Ethics Survey, we interviewed ethics and compliance leaders from multiple organizations working on a global scale. And we learned that many of them are struggling with the same type of questions, where we can see that the profession, either you work with corporate responsibility or ethics and compliance, we're a bit puzzled. What is our role in this current climate? How are we supposed to work with not only legal requirements, but building ethical organizations? So that's really the million-dollar question for this afternoon or morning for you, Alison. We have the chat open, so please, everyone, make sure to ask your questions during this session. Niina and myself will try to weave in these in the conversation, so let's keep this as interactive as possible. So with that, Niina, should we just start the conversation?
Definitely. Hello also from my side, and hi, Alison. So happy to have you here. Couldn't also think about any better person to discuss this. And I think when the question is about ethics and compliance as a profession, I think it's also a very personal question to many of us people on the line. And I made an observation when we had the ethics and compliance survey launch last year. I think based on the kind of individual conversations, it's very clear that people are struggling and they feel kind of a little bit mixed emotions between this hard compliance and soft compliance. But in the bigger room, it seems like it's a little bit more difficult to even admit that we are facing these challenges. So definitely, I'm very happy that we have so many people here today listening to this and maybe also collecting own thoughts on this important topic. And I think definitely in the world that we live in today, it's more important than ever to also find your own balance between these different aspects. But maybe the first question, Alison, to you is that if we start and look at the whole big picture and what Anna just said, do you think that we overestimate the complexity and challenges that the sustainability and ethics and compliance officers are facing?
I mean, based on what you've just said and the wonderful survey that you did, I don't think we're overestimating it. I think this is an incredibly complex time to be thinking about any question related to ethics and corporate responsibility. We're going to get into, I know, ethics and compliance and sustainability, but I think one thing maybe we can say up front is we have at least been able to proceed until now on the basis that the legal regulation is going in a certain direction. It might be bumpy, but globally we're heading in the same direction. We have bodies like the UN adjudicating and providing international soft law. We are all basically adhering to the same ideas of liberal values, democracy, human rights, environmental responsibility. And now I think it feels as if a lot of those assumptions on a global scale are breaking down. So I don't think it's surprising to see ethics and compliance officers defaulting to hard law and saying that's a safe, firm ground. At least no one's going to argue with us about it. The challenge with that, I think, is it doesn't actually make anything more simple in practical terms, because if laws are increasingly diverging and becoming inconsistent, what you've actually got is more complexity. You can't anchor to that floor when the floor is shifting all the time.
I love that. Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective that actually what we think is going to bring simplicity and saying, okay, let's just stick to what's legally required may actually bring more complexity in our organizations. But do you have any practical tips and like how to navigate this? Because I'm not the only one. I think there are so many on the call and listening to this who say, okay, but how do we navigate this? Because in the boardrooms, sticking to the bare minimum legal seems like the easier route.
I mean, I think there has been a shift, and I would say there's more from the perspective of sustainability, but perhaps it applies to ethics and compliance. I do think that a few years ago we had a situation where corporations felt pressured to maybe overpromise. And there was a lot of understanding that we're expecting corporations to solve societal problems. I think that led to a lot of greenwashing. It led to a lot of, net zero targets and kind of principles in a vacuum. And so now I think we are shifting to more of a discussion about where does the corporation have a legitimate role? So what particular issues affect that corporation's business model, and where does it have a legitimate voice to speak? And so I think rather than a sort of idea that we need corporations to solve all these global problems because governments aren't going to solve them, I think we've moved to a conversation now where corporations are having to be a little bit more thoughtful about what can I directly impact? What do my stakeholders expect? Rather than a sort of, we need all corporations to solve all the sustainable development goals right now. So that's where I think we should be, is more about legitimacy, more about leverage, more about honesty about the challenges. But I feel too many corporations find that a bit overwhelming and have decided to kind of abandon it all, and will just sort of stick to hard law compliance and hope that that means that we don't attract any attention.
Exactly. So Alison, I get a lot of this question that is about, why should we care about ethics and bring the ethics up? Because we have, global leaders who don't think about ethics is important. So what would be your response into the kind of a business case for business ethics?
Well, I mean, yes, we certainly, I think this is undeniable, have a global leadership crisis. I think the general public is looking at today's leaders in both corporations and government and and wondering why they should be following these people. And so, you know, I'm not American, but I'm based in the US. You know, to be very specific and very concrete, what we have at the moment is members of the general public willing to resist overreach by ICE, in some cases having given their lives. And at the same time, you have a reluctance to say anything from powerful CEOs and powerful corporations. So we might again think that we're doing the sensible thing and protecting shareholder value and keeping our heads below the parapet. But I think there's a wider crisis if our customers, our employees, our other stakeholders can't trust corporate leaders who are very well paid, who are very powerful, who are very influential. If it feels like there's a leadership vacuum there, then I think that undermines a lot more things. And I think there is a long-term erosion of trust that is maybe not being fully factored in right now. So I do think we need a little bit more thought at the top about what this positioning looks like.
Definitely, and as said, now it's, you know, needed more than ever to kind of bring the ethics up, and if we're not doing that, who else gonna do it?
Yeah, I think, you know, we can see, I don't know how many people were following all the events at Davos, but Mark Carney, I think, giving this very kind of honest and transparent speech about where we are and setting out a vision. You can see he got a standing ovation. You can see the amount of publicity that got, how much people need to feel that kind of message, and really how rare it is. So I found that very significant as well.
Yeah. So Alison, if we go then to the theme of the professional identity crisis that some sustainability and ethics and compliance officers may feel. So you just said that basically it's all about finding your topic where it really matters, and especially if we talk about sustainability, it's about the business proposition and really finding where can we as an organization, with what we do as a business, where can we make a difference. But if that is the whole value proposition of sustainability, to integrate it into your core business, because that is what will make sense for business leaders, what's the role of sustainability departments and sustainability teams? What do you see happening there?
I think this is a really good question, and something I'm observing is that maybe when your sustainability efforts are immature or just starting out, or you're doing measurement or materiality assessments, there's a very clear need for a sustainability team. But actually, I'm observing that a lot of the companies that are very advanced in this area, and because sustainability touches every part of the business, then if you've got sustainability specialists in your you've got an energy transition team, you've got sustainable sourcing specialists, you're thinking about it in strategy, you've got sustainability issues baked into your enterprise risk assessment, then I think that does raise a lot of questions about what that centralized team should be doing. So in a way, it's a sign of success if you've got started to get these concepts embedded throughout. I would argue that you still need a centralized sustainability function, partly to look ahead, partly to think about the strategic narrative. But I think one interesting trend I'm seeing is more of a convergence back between sustainability and corporate affairs, partly because I think the narrative challenges are so profound, which 10 years ago was a red flag. 10 years ago said that you're treating sustainability as marketing. But now I think is increasingly a sign that the business has digested these issues, the business is aware and is integrating into core functions. And so then what you've got left is this huge challenge of how you communicate clearly about very, very complicated issues where you have only limited leverage, where the topic is very, very technical a lot of the time. So how you bring clarity there, how you make the general public and your stakeholders understand what's going on without oversimplifying and without greenwashing, and how you make sure that what you're saying reflects what you're actually doing, those I think are still huge challenges, and I would argue that we still need leadership there. But in a way, this is a sign of progress, not a sign that we're falling back.
Yeah, and but I think there it's really recalibrating the role where it has the biggest impact. And I would agree with you that, you know, sustainability and public affairs is becoming very interlinked, because we do also see how much the regulatory landscape is influencing our agendas, and especially in an EU context. I think we have during the last 12 months been in a very unfortunate situation where there's been such volatility on a regulatory front that it's undermining the work, because as a senior leader or as a board professional, when you look at how the EU is acting within this sphere, it becomes like a joke. It's like back and forth and regulation, no regulation, and where's the thresholds, and it's very, I would say it's damaging to companies. And then to be able to be there and talk with the lawmakers and say, actually, I think most companies support regulation in this area because it's creating a level playing field, and it's avoiding, as you were saying, the complexity of different legal frameworks in different jurisdictions. But let's not do it like this, because how it's been done at the moment, it's just very, very damaging. So there I find, yes, sustainability and public and governmental affairs is very much interlinked.
Yeah, that really at the forefront. And then, you know, maybe, I know we're going to get to this, but I think that's maybe been a missed opportunity for the ethics and compliance function, who should be central in that discussion as well. But yes, the geopolitical volatility and thinking about, I think, political risk and international positioning has been a big blind spot in sustainability historically. I think we have designed a lot of these programs for big multinationals. We haven't thought about the role of emerging markets. We haven't thought about the different visions around this topic. You know, China has a very different view of how this is going than the US. And so this has always been inherently political. And I think there's been a tendency in sustainability to sort of say, we're just doing this and everybody wants it. And so we're just kind of seeing the blind spots, I think, come to the fore. But what you're saying about the volatility around environmental and social regulation is a very good illustration of why anchoring to regulation is not the anchor you think. I think we are also seeing, in terms of reporting, ESG reporting is very often now either under the financial function or the compliance function. So that's another sign of kind of integration and maturity. But what I think is maybe missing is, where are we going to anchor if not to the legal floor? And I do still think there's a need for principle. There's a need to say, we're going to be here. We're going to adhere to the most draconian law, wherever it might be. And that is going to be a better anchor than shifting as to what the lowest common denominator is.
Yeah. So I would say that then before, Niina, we jump into the ethics and compliance profession and that recalibration, but then really listening to what you're saying, Alison, for those working with sustainability, realizing that we need to step in and be part of the discussion, actually also shaping the regulation, and not dare to actually look at, okay, what is most relevant for our organization? Where can we have the biggest impact? And also realize that also relates to more public relations, government relations, a field that you said we moved away from because it was seen as a marketing exercise, or, you know, some kind of influencing. We didn't want to go there. But now, to actually advance the sustainable agenda, that's perhaps where we need to go and build that capacity, because I think many sustainability teams probably has lost that over the years.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you know, this may be very US centric, though I don't think it is. I think many CEOs and many boards feel sort of trapped between these minimalist and maximalist visions. So we had a very maximalist vision. We need to solve climate change, inequality, protect the rule of law. You know, we need to have an initiative for every emerging issue. There's been a backlash. So now I think many leaders concluding we don't need to do anything. And I think the role of the ethics profession is to say, no, you don't have to do everything, but doing nothing isn't an option either. Let me help you find the middle reasonable path. Let me help you think about what to prioritize. Let me help you think about where to focus in a way that's not naive and suggests you have to solve every problem, but is also not just kind of throwing up your hands and saying you don't need to do anything.
Definitely. But so we discussed about the role of sustainability teams, but you already started to answer the question on the ethics and compliance teams, which is quite interesting because we know that, businesses don't have a soul. And when we talk about ethics, it's a personal thing. And the whole purpose of ethics and compliance office programs is to enable good decision making for the individuals. So how do you see the role of these functions who call themselves ethics and compliance, and where do you see their role today and maybe in the future? Are they needed?
I mean, I think they are needed, and I would draw a contrast. I think sustainability in a way is more complicated because there's a big debate in the field about, is this a business case issue? Is this a values issue? Is this an impact issue? Where do we sit? What do we do? It affects every function in the company. I think ethics and compliance officers know that their role is to create an ethical culture. I've been arguing for many, many years that this needs to be a strategic function that helps leadership think about the strategic implications of ethical positioning. And so I recognize, and I think it comes to the fore in your survey, lots of teams feeling under pressure, feeling they're getting headcount cut, feeling their budget is cut, feeling like there's a general culture that this has gone too far. And so I think we need to not take that lying down. I think we need to continue to communicate how important it is that employees believe in these things, that employees have a voice, that concerns are heard, that rules are not enough. We also need principles, that we need to acknowledge that our leaders are role models, they set the tone, they create the incentives. So to just sort of say, well, we don't need to worry about culture anymore and we don't need to worry about principles and we're just going to go back to sticking to our knitting, I understand the pressures, but I think we've got to push back on that. We in many ways need ethical leadership and coherence around this more than ever. So we need, I think, ethics leaders to step up and be able to put their roles in a broader context.
Yeah. So what would you say to our listeners who are heading up the ethics and compliance function and maybe have been thinking recently that they don't have the time for ethics because they have to do all of these tasks to be compliant and answer the needs that they are getting from their organization?
I mean, I think we've got to go and make the case to senior leadership that anchor to regulation is not the cost-cutting, simplifying effort that you think it is. There's just been a story I'm reading this morning about how the US government is taking away, the categorization of climate change as damaging to health. And so you might, knee-jerk think that that's going to reduce the regulatory burden for corporations. It isn't, because there are still other regulations internationally. US states are going to come up with different regulations. So we're moving from something clear and federal that we could all adhere to much more of a patchwork of rules. And if we think that's less work, we're kidding ourselves. So I think what we need is to have the confidence to say to leaders, it might not feel like a high ethics environment, but the general public, your employees, are still watching. They still want to see inspiration. They still want to be motivated. They still want principles. They want direction in this chaotic world. And so, you're missing a trick by not helping to shape that direction. You're undermining trust that could be hard, have been built over many, many years. So, let's not abandon the more intangible and fundamental in favor of the risks right in front of us. And so I think we all need to get better at making that case.
Yeah, and standing up for those values, why we chose this position and profession in the first place, right?
Yes, exactly. So let's, I'm looking, there's a lot of good questions in the chat, Alison. So here's one from Philip asking about how do you see the use of resilience as a sustainability topic? Because I think many of us are starting to talk about sustainability is really about resilience. How do you view the use of that term or relabeling of sustainability into corporate resilience?
I mean, you know, one thing I observe, and it's true to some degree of ethics and compliance, it's really true of sustainability. We're very fond of coining a new piece of jargon. So there's a constant effort to reframe what we're doing. That said, I think resilience is okay because I think it does communicate something. I am seeing, for example, I'll give you another example straight from the US. There have been, as I'm sure people have not missed, a lot of dialing back of programs and principles around diversity and inclusion, around issues like climate change, because of pressure from the administration. We have, particularly in the US, we're paying attention to Target, which is a company that's been a very inclusive brand that really led the charge after George Floyd was murdered and is now really facing a lot of reputational pressure because it's dialed back its programs, it's not seen to be protecting its employees and so on. Contrasting with that, you have Costco, which is a company that is beloved by employees and consumers, has not dialed back its DEI programs, has even gone ahead and sued the Trump administration over tariffs, and is not facing the kind of retaliation that Target is seeing. And so understands, I think, it has enormous loyalty. You know, it treats its people well. It thinks about human dignity and respect. All consumers love it. It's got a really bipartisan profile. And we can see that those approaches that are very, very long running, and Costco hasn't wavered from them, are really giving that company resilience in the face of social and political turmoil. So I think as long as we understand what it is, as long as we understand its intangible kind of bedrock of trust and how important that is, as long as we're not just wheeling out new jargon for the sake of it, then I think resilience can be powerful. But it's hard to define, hard to execute, and so as always the devil is in the detail.
Yeah, and I'm very how should I say, puzzled, it's maybe not the right word, but because I'm afraid, Alison, is it, you were saying, okay, yet another jargon. Yeah, I think sustainability is famous for that, to find another word that's less politically heated or whatever. However, with corporate resilience, for me, that is about the corporation. It's about us as a business. How can we be resilient in this day and age, today, tomorrow, and in 10 years? Obviously, that is like a core responsibility of a corporation to make sure we have business models, we operate in a way that we can sustain over time. For me, it's a no-brainer. However, where I become a little bit puzzled is that we then move away from the responsibility piece, the corporate responsibility piece, which sort of extends beyond ourselves. And then we can start focusing on, it's about us as a company, how do we survive and thrive, and not necessarily think about all of the consequences. So I don't know, I'm a bit, I don't want to lose the responsibility piece. I think that's my main comment.
If it's jargon that's used to justify losing that responsibility piece, then we have a problem, because I think at the end of the day, the core question is, how far should a corporation go to address the environmental and social impacts that it causes and is exposed to? And I think denying that you're causing these impacts and treating this as just a matter of risk, maybe just a matter of reputational risk, is missing the bigger picture. At the same time, I think part of the reason we are where we are today is that was too much rhetoric from both ethics and sustainability leaders that we need to address it all in a way that was maybe naive, that didn't think about what was appropriate, what issues a company could take on. So I think we overpromised and then we've overcorrected. And we need to get back to something that's more coherent and more strategic. And that's where I think we need ethics leaders to step up.
Yeah, so there's a practical tip for the ethics leaders for how you can recalibrate your purpose.
Yes. And going back to the kind of whole future of ethics and compliance profession and how we keep ourselves relevant, we have an excellent question from Vaasa, Finland, from Lisette. She's asking, or she's curious to know from you, Alison, what competencies you think that will define the next generations of compliance professionals, and how should companies start developing them now? And there is, in a row, another question too. How do you foresee the role of compliance transforming in the next few years as the AI-driven decision-making becomes more widespread?
Yeah, I was going to go to AI even before that second question. You can't avoid it these days unless you're hiding under a rock. So I think that AI is going to bring a lot of benefits. It's going to help you analyze vast volumes of data. It is going to raise questions about what kind of team members and employees you need. There are a lot of opportunities here. But I think certainly we can see the discourse evolving in real time from AI, AI is the future. If you're not using it, you're going to be anachronistic. You're not going to keep your job. We need to adopt AI as quickly as possible. Now, I think because we're not seeing the productivity benefits or the financial benefits come, I think there's now more of a kind of question around how does this fit into the organization? How do we want our employees to be using it? What is this doing to culture? What does this mean to job descriptions? What does this mean to hiring? If we are going to decimate the white collar workforce, what does that look like? So I think there's a need for deep thinking around the deployment of these technologies and not just deploying these technologies in the team because it makes life useful. I think a lot of profound questions coming up with the use of AI that I would like to see ethics and compliance officers at the table to try and solve. These are governance issues, they're culture issues, they're ethics issues, they're issues about who you hire and where your company is going over the long term. There are issues around, entry-level jobs and whether they're going to be eliminated and we're going to lose that knowledge transfer. So I think we need to think about this topic not just in terms of what tools can it give us to make our jobs easier, but also those kind of challenges that it presents to the organization. One then of my other reflections would be that this puts even more emphasis on the importance of behavioral science, social psychology, how people feel about their work. I've been talking about this for years and saying that this is key to ethics and compliance competencies. So I hope that we will still see that kind of thread coming through, and the ethics and compliance officers will still focus on the kind of behavioral and cultural aspects of their roles.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm a little bit worried personally that using AI as an ethics and compliance person will somehow make me biased or make me not to use my own judgment or my own values. How do you see this kind of a risk in this job?
Yeah, I mean, this is the million-dollar question. I mean, it's a little bit to draw an analogy of what's happening in universities. We are seeing the use of AI transforming how we do assessments, how we teach. I have myself moved to a no screens policy in the classroom. I've had to completely adapt the assignments I give because I've got to assume that a student is using these tools. And so I suppose to take an analogy, the wrong way to think about this is to just put a few rules about how to use AI in your syllabus. You've actually got to think about completely transforming how you educate students. And so the analogy there would be, it's not enough for the ethics and compliance officer to put in place rules or to roll out tools in the organization. There is a need to think more broadly about what work are we doing and how we do it. And there, I think, again, senior leadership, which feels very pressured to adopt these targets to show financial benefits, needs to have a thought partner in the ethics and compliance role, in the ethics and compliance team, to help them think through some of those questions. And these are complicated questions and they're hard work. And I think there's always a tendency to kind of just roll out tools and think that's going to be enough. And I think it's now becoming clear how much deeper thinking we really need to do about these emerging technologies.
Yeah, and we're all on a learning curve there, right? So that's also. Exactly. But I think we have two questions. I'm just scrolling through the chat, which sort of like one question that we have here is relating to, you know, the multitude of compliance topics that we have today in organizations. So we have here IT, finance, quality, sustainability, healthcare. Well, then we have bribery, data privacy, cyber. And today, these topics may be scattered in the organization. So the compliance team does not necessarily have the responsibility for all of those compliance topics, which then leads to, you know, the question, do you see a trend there to actually merge the responsibility for compliance topics into one function or one role, or do you see that no, but these are so different topics that we will need to have different functions working on this? So I don't know if you have any insights, because that's something I struggle with as well in my role, just thinking, okay, what is the scope of ethics and compliance in relation to the multitude of compliance topics that keeps popping up?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great question and it's a real problem. And if we place that against kind of reducing team sizes, we can see that there's complexity and there's overwhelm. You know, I guess this is maybe an oversimplified comment, but I think what we've got to do is think about where the organization is exposed to these issues, which employees are really exposed to these issues, which decision makers. So rather than rolling out a rule for every eventuality, which may not be relevant to the vast majority of employees, I think you've got to do a deep qualitative risk mapping and find out who's exposed to what, who's exposed to dealing with government officials, who's exposed to cybersecurity risks, who's exposed to ethics violations, and do something much more tailored so that you don't end up with employees feeling overwhelmed by rules. We all know that being overwhelmed by rules and too many rules short circuits ethical reasoning. And so I think there's a need for more kind of qualitative thought about where an organization is really exposed. You don't necessarily need a gold-plated rule for every eventuality. You need to think about who's doing what role and which ethical dilemmas are showing up in that role. And I think that mapping and that analysis is going to be well worth the money.
Yeah, so back to basics, do a proper risk analysis, look at your company, what's most relevant for us, you know, how, and it's a little bit the same as you said with sustainability, right? Find your core topics where it really matters in terms of your impact, but also then in terms of compliance, more in terms of the risks. So not a one size fits all approach.
Yeah, I have a quote in my book, which is a few years old now. It's just coming up to 2 this week, but from Hui Chen, who is the compliance lead at the DOJ. And she had been investigating a company for expenses violations, and the company had responded by, you know, understandably, they're under pressure from the DOJ, wanting to do expense training for every single one of their employees. And Hui asked, you know, how many employees have actually got a company credit card? And the answer was 150. And so I think there very often is that sort of knee-jerk, this pressure's coming up, we need to react to it, rather than stepping back and saying, what do we need to deploy where? Do people know where they've got to go for help? Are we really properly making our leadership team understand that they're role models, understanding that they set the context? Are we looking at how money is made, not just whether it is made? So this is all back to basics, but it feels as if we've kind of lost sight of those basics in the last few years. And I think we do need to kind of reground our efforts on what has been good advice all along.
Yeah, and talking about controls, I think we can't end this session without talking about Nordic values and the Nordic naive blue eyes. I think this is one of the topics we discussed with Anna when we established the whole Nordic Business Ethics Initiative, because we felt that there is a need to bring also the uncomfortable topics into the table in the Nordic organizations who tend to think, in broadly speaking, that we have these good values. We are not like others. We don't need the controls because we have this amazing trust and we are so ethical and we can rely on these values without needing to invest in heavy control mechanisms and compliance teams. And we know that the compliance teams and resources are very small compared to many other places. So how do you see, Alison, looking at the Nordics from your perspective?
I mean, I think there's something in this, right? You know, the Nordic countries have the benefit of, well, many benefits. I think there's a much clearer social contract. That societies are less diverse, for better and worse. And so maybe that leads to making assumptions that in the US, or even I'm British, even in the British context, you can't get away with. If you are in a society where people have very divergent values, where values are contested, where there's a lot of polarization, there's a lot of debate, then you need to give deliberate thought to these topics because they're so friction based. If it feels like there's no friction, then maybe that means that there's not enough attention paid to these issues. And then something else you said is maybe an underappreciation that you still need clear rules. You still need to be communicating that the same rules apply to leaders and everybody else in the organization. And I think we do see in the Nordic context that lack of those lapses around, you know, leaders are have the same responsibility and the same obligations as everyone else. Different rules don't apply to the leadership team. So I think there, you know, maybe an underestimation of the importance of rules. And I've spent most of this conversation talking about how rules aren't enough, but you still need them to be clear, and you still need to make it clear to leaders that they are subject to the same requirements as everybody else. So I think that's one element. I think with everything going on in the world, it's becoming increasingly clear to the Nordic region that, you know, it was always clear on paper, but, you know, clear in a visceral sense that the rest of the world does not think like you, cannot rely on the same assumptions. And so even more of a reason, I think, to have a conversation as well about what is your identity going to be in this global world? Are you going to really anchor to Scandinavian values? Or are you going to say, it's a turbulent world, so let's do the bare minimum? And I think these are really kind of profound and interesting questions in the Scandinavian context and in the European context more broadly right now.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. You say we have to decide, you know, what are we going to be? And then if we claim we have these strong Nordic values, how do they show in how we do business and make decisions? And I do think Nordic organizations, many are in crossroads, being torn, and it's not so easy to stand up for these values. But that is what we have to do and what we support each other in this community. So I think, Niina, we need to start wrapping up here, right? We said we will stick to 45 minutes. This has been amazing, Alison. Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your insights. This has been so inspirational, even if it also feels it's a lot of work and we need to do things in a new way and challenge our previous ways of working. I think that's very, very clear.
I think yes. If you think about it, crisis also always brings opportunity, right? So it does feel like a time of crisis, but that is also means conversations and avenues are open that they're not if we're just making assumptions that we know what we're doing. So An absolute pleasure as well to talk to you both. Just always learn so much from you. Hope to see you in real life sometime in 2026, but just a joy to be in conversation with you today.
Yes, the sauna is waiting for you here in Finland, Alison.
Yes.
So we'll see
I
you there.
need to get over there. That would be amazing. Just love to see you both.
No, we will make that happen. But just so on this theme, we will still have another conversation this spring. So on, Niina, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's on March 9th. We will have a discussion with Andreas Rache from, he is at Copenhagen Business School. Those of you who are on LinkedIn know that he is as active as Alison, but in a different field. So Andreas is very much on top of the conversation of the regulations, what's happening on an EU level in terms of sustainability regulations. And we are going to discuss the topic with him of whether we're going from culture to compliance, a bit on the same theme, but discuss how now this turbulence on an EU level when it comes to regulations, how it pushes companies to an approach of minimum compliance. And I'm sure we have some good questions here in the chat that we weren't able to answer. We'll take them to that discussion, but please make sure to sign up for that conversation as well, where we try to together just grapple with this and try, as you say, Alison, try to use this moment that we have as an opportunity to really bring change and transformation into our organizations. So hope to see you there. And Niina, anything I forgot?
No, nothing. We got a lot of questions here we didn't have time to answer, but let's continue the discussion also in LinkedIn and in the next webinar session. So thank you for the very active audience.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you soon.
See you.
Bye-bye.